"You might want to put that phone down, ma'am," a calm voice said from behind me, "because you just walked into a recorded meeting with the state attorney general." The sound of splintering wood echoed across the lake before I even looked up from the folder in front of me. It was 7:42 p.m., the sky outside my cabin windows turning that deep blue that only shows up on still water, when Brenda Whitmore decided she didn't need permission to enter my property anymore. The smell of pine and cold lake air drifted through the cracked kitchen window, mixing with the sharp scent of fresh coffee I'd just poured. Then came the rattling of my front door handle. Hard, impatient, like she already believed it belonged to her. "My name is Ethan Cole, and that cabin on Clearwater Lake has been in my family since 1978. Cedar siding weathered by 40 Midwest winters. A wraparound porch that creaks in exactly 3 places if you step wrong. 43 acres of private shoreline, deeded and surveyed long before Brenda ever learned the word covenant. I bought out my cousin's shares 5 years ago, paid in full, recorded at the county clerk's office in black ink and embossed seals. Clean title. No HOA jurisdiction. At least, not legally. Brenda, however, operates on a different definition of law. She's the president of the Pine Hollow HOA, a woman who measures grass height with a stainless steel ruler and refers to her cul-de-sac as our community ecosystem. White SUV. Oversized sunglasses. Voice that can turn a polite suggestion into a neighborhood mandate in under 10 seconds. For the past 6 months, she's insisted my cabin somehow falls under Pine Hollow's expanded recreational oversight zone. That's not a real thing, by the way, but she says it with such confidence you'd think it was printed in the Constitution. The first letter she sent me was about dock aesthetics. The second warned about unregistered watercraft presence. The third threatened fines for unauthorized private gatherings. Tonight, apparently, she skipped paperwork altogether. The knock didn't come. Instead, the door flew inward with a sharp crack as the latch plate gave way. Cool evening air rushed inside, carrying the faint smell of lake algae and gasoline from her idling engine. Brenda stepped over my threshold like she was inspecting a rental unit. Phone already raised, camera recording. "This is unlawful. Occupancy," she announced to her screen. "Emergency entry under HOA authority." The audacity would have been almost impressive if it weren't so reckless. I didn't stand up. I didn't raise my voice. I just closed the manila folder in front of me and listened to the floorboards answer her heels with that familiar triple creak. She didn't notice the second set of footsteps in the room until she was fully inside. And by then, the meeting she thought she was interrupting had already been underway for 23 minutes. Brenda froze mid-sentence, her phone still raised, the glow from the screen reflecting off the glass cabinets my father installed by hand in 1994. The lake outside had gone quiet, the kind of silence that settles right before full dark, when the last fishing boat heads back to the marina and the water turns black as ink. I stayed seated at the oak table, my palms flat against the smooth surface worn down by decades of card games and paperwork. Across from me sat Daniel Cross, the state attorney general, jacket folded neatly over the back of his chair, sleeves rolled once at the cuffs like a man who came to work, not to pose. To his right was Special Investigator Laura Bennett from his office, her legal pad open, pen hovering, eyes calm and observant. The only sound in the room was the soft hum of the ceiling fan and the faint ticking of the old wall clock above the stone fireplace. Brenda's heels stopped creaking. Her voice, which moments earlier carried that confident suburban authority, thinned just slightly. "I did not realize this was a formal proceeding," she said, lowering her phone but not quite turning it off. Daniel did not raise his voice. He did not stand. He simply adjusted the folder in front of him and looked at her over the rim of his glasses. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "you announced emergency entry under association authority. I would like to understand the statutory basis for that claim." The word statutory basis hung in the air like a weight. I could smell the coffee cooling in my mug, could feel the faint vibration of my security system still recording from the door camera. I had invited Daniel to the cabin that evening for a reason. For months, Pine Hollow Homeowners Association had been sending letters asserting jurisdiction over properties that were never part of their original plat. My land was one of them. 43 acres surveyed in 1978, clearly outside the subdivision boundary lines filed with the county. Yet Brenda had pushed an expansion initiative, telling neighbors that shoreline parcels like mine were community assets subject to compliance reviews. She had fined 2 elderly owners for docks that had stood longer than her presidency. She had threatened liens over landscaping that existed before Pine Hollow was even incorporated. I did not argue publicly. I did not shout at board meetings. I collected letters, envelopes, certified mail receipts. I requested copies of bylaws and amendments. I compared them against county records in black and white. And when I noticed discrepancies in filing dates and language that did not match state requirements for annexation, I requested a quiet meeting. That meeting was what she had just stepped into. Daniel slid a document across the table toward me without breaking eye contact with Brenda. Mr. Cole has provided copies of the original deed, the subdivision map, and your association's amended covenants, he said calmly. There appeared to be inconsistencies. Brenda shifted her weight, the faint scent of expensive perfume cutting through pine and coffee. We are protecting property values, she insisted. We have the right to inspect. Daniel nodded once, almost sympathetically. Inspection, he said, typically requires consent or a court order. Did you obtain either before forcing entry? The clock ticked again. Outside, a single loon called across the lake. And for the first time since I had known her, Brenda Whitmore did not immediately have an answer. Brenda's silence did not last long, but it was long enough for the weight of it to settle over the room like the humidity before a summer storm. She straightened her blazer, lifted her chin, and stepped fully inside as if confidence alone could rewrite the last 60 seconds. Our association expanded its oversight last year, she said carefully. We voted. The majority approved it. Properties surrounding the lake impact community value. We have authority to intervene when standards are threatened. Her voice regained some of its usual edge, the tone she used at board meetings when no one dared question her interpretation of the bylaws. Daniel folded his hands on the table. Expanded oversight. He repeated, not mocking, not impressed. Filed with the county recorder? Brenda hesitated. Just a fraction. I noticed because I have spent months watching her speak. Watching the way she pauses when she is building a narrative instead of stating a fact. It was approved internally, she replied. The ceiling fan rotated slowly above us, pushing cool air across the room. I could hear the faint buzz of insects beginning their chorus outside the screened windows. Special Investigator Bennett flipped a page on her legal pad and spoke for the first time. We reviewed Pine Hollow's amended covenants, she said calmly. The document claims annexation rights over adjacent parcels, but we did not locate any signed consent from those parcel owners. Brenda's eyes flicked toward me. That familiar look. The one that said I was the problem. The outsider. The stubborn landowner who refused to cooperate with her vision. He was notified, she said sharply. Certified mail. 3 times. I nodded once. I received letters, I said evenly. I did not sign consent. The wood stove behind me ticked softly as it cooled, the metallic sound small but steady. Daniel opened another folder, sliding out a survey map printed on thick archival paper. The inked boundary lines were crisp, drawn decades before Pine Hollow existed. Mr. Cole's parcel is not within your subdivision's legal description, he said. An association cannot unilaterally extend jurisdiction beyond its recorded plat without explicit written agreement. Brenda's composure tightened, like someone pulling a belt one notch too far. We are protecting residents, she insisted. His dock lights shine toward our shoreline. His guests park near the access road. There have been complaints. I almost smiled at that. Complaints. The word she used whenever control slipped from her hands. The dock lights are shielded and comply with county code, I said quietly. Parking is on my private drive, 600 feet from your nearest lot line. Daniel's gaze shifted back to her. Even if there were nuisance concerns, he said, the remedy would be mediation or civil action, not forced entry. The word forced entry landed softly but firmly. Brenda glanced back toward the open door, where the broken latch hung slightly crooked in the frame. The night air moved through it, carrying the scent of water and cedar. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Daniel leaned back in his chair, the wood legs creaking gently against the floor. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, voice steady as the lake. Outside. Help me understand why you believed you could cross a recorded property line and declare emergency authority without a court order. And once again, the room grew very still. Brenda drew in a slow breath. The kind people take when they are about to double down instead of step back. We had cause, she said, her voice tightening but still trying to project control. There were reports of unauthorized gatherings, potential code violations, and safety concerns regarding shoreline access. As president of the association, I am obligated to act when a property threatens community standards. The word obligated hung there, polished and rehearsed. I could hear the faint lap of water against the dock posts outside, steady and patient, like the lake had seen this kind of human arrogance before. Daniel did not interrupt her. He let her continue. That was his way. Let the narrative expand until it reveals its own flaws. Emergency authority exists in our bylaws, she pressed on. In cases of imminent risk. Investigator Bennett looked up from her notes. Imminent risk of what, specifically? She asked calmly. Brenda hesitated, and I watched the calculation behind her eyes. Structural instability. Unauthorized construction. Possible environmental hazards. I leaned back slightly in my chair, the wood creaking beneath me. The cabin was built to county code and inspected twice in the last 5 years. My dock permit was current. My septic system had passed inspection the previous summer. Every document sat inside the manila folder inches from Daniel's hand. The scent of cedar from the walls mixed with the faint metallic tang from the broken latch near the door. Daniel reached for another sheet of paper and slid it forward. We obtained a copy of your emergency provision, he said evenly. It allows entry for conditions posing immediate physical danger to residents within the subdivision. This parcel is not within the subdivision, nor have you identified a documented emergency. Brenda's shoulders stiffened. The lake connects us all, she replied quickly. Impact to one shoreline affects the entire community. That was her strategy. Blur the lines. Expand the circle until it includes everything. Shared water does not create shared ownership, Daniel said quietly. The simplicity of that sentence felt heavier than any raised voice could have. Outside, a pickup truck drove past on the distant county road, tires humming briefly before fading into the night. Brenda glanced again. At the open doorway, at the slight tilt of the latch plate where it had separated from the frame. I believed I had authority, she said, softer now, but still defensive. I was protecting property values. I felt a small, steady calm settle in my chest. Months ago, when the letters first arrived accusing me of noncompliance, I had considered ignoring them. Then the fines escalated. Then came threats of liens. Then certified notices implying enforcement action. Every envelope smelled faintly of printer toner and confidence. I did not respond emotionally. I responded methodically. I documented timestamps. I requested meeting minutes. I compared filing dates at the county office under fluorescent lights that hummed louder than this ceiling fan ever could. And now the pattern was laid out across my kitchen table in clean, organized stacks. Daniel folded his hands again. Belief, he said, meeting her gaze, is not the same as legal authority. The words settled into the quiet room, steady and unshaken, while the lake outside remained perfectly still. The quiet stretched long enough that I could hear my own breathing, slow and even, matching the rhythm of the water brushing against the dock pilings outside. Brenda shifted her weight again, the faint click of her heel against the hardwood sounding sharper now that her certainty had thinned. She looked at the folders on my table like they were foreign objects, like documentation itself was somehow unfair. You are making this into something it is not, she said finally, directing the words more toward Daniel than me. This is a simple community compliance matter. It did not require state involvement. Daniel did not blink. It became a state matter the moment a private citizen reported a pattern of unauthorized enforcement actions, he replied calmly. The phrase pattern of unauthorized enforcement actions was not dramatic. It was clinical, precise, and it carried more weight than any accusation I could have thrown myself. I kept my hands folded, resisting the urge to point at the broken latch, at the open doorway framing the dark lake beyond. Instead, I let the evidence speak in its own quiet way. The security system indicator on the wall glowed steady green. The timestamp in the corner of the door camera feed continued to record every second since she crossed the threshold. Brenda's eyes followed Daniel's gaze to the screen mounted near the bookshelf. On it, the footage replayed silently. Her vehicle pulling into my gravel drive, headlights cutting across pine trunks, her walking up the steps, her hand testing the handle. the abrupt inward movement of the door when the latch gave way. No raised voices. No confrontation. Just action. Daniel nodded slightly toward the screen. This was not preceded by a court order, law enforcement presence, or documented emergency declaration, he said. Do you disagree with that sequence? Brenda swallowed. I saw the movement in her throat, even in the dim light. I believe time was of the essence, she answered, quieter now. Complaints were escalating. I leaned forward just enough to rest my forearms on the table. The complaints were about dock lighting and weekend guests. I said evenly. Both compliant with county ordinance. The word ordinance hung in the air like a boundary marker. Investigator Bennett flipped another page. We also reviewed correspondence from Pine Hollow threatening liens against non-consenting parcel owners, she said. Those liens referenced amended covenants that were never recorded with the county. Brenda's composure cracked not outwardly, but subtly, like a hairline fracture in glass. We were in the process of filing, she insisted. Daniel's voice remained level. An association cannot enforce unrecorded amendments against non-members, he said, and it cannot create emergency authority where none exists. The lake breeze moved through the open doorway again, stirring the corner of the survey map on the table. I thought back to the first certified letter, the one that smelled faintly of fresh ink and assumption. Back then, she spoke as if resistance was futile, as if everyone eventually yielded. Tonight, she stood in a room where yielding was no longer optional. Mrs. Whitmore, Daniel said gently, but firmly, what you describe as protection of property values may constitute overreach under state statute. The word statute settled into the wood grain of the table between us. And for the first time since she stepped inside, Brenda Whitmore looked less like a president and more like someone who had stepped past a line she never expected to be challenged. The air in the cabin felt cooler now, not because the temperature had changed, but because certainty had shifted sides. Brenda stood near the doorway, no longer advancing, no longer declaring authority, just holding onto the last threads of her narrative. Daniel reached for the final document in his folder and laid it flat on the table with deliberate care. The paper made a soft sliding sound against the oak surface, the kind of sound you only notice when a room has gone completely still. Earlier this afternoon, he said, voice steady as ever, my office issued a preliminary notice of inquiry regarding Pine Hollow Homeowners Association. Brenda's eyes dropped to the heading at the top of the page. I watched the color in her face change, not dramatically, but enough to register. The lake outside reflected the first faint stars, and the porch light cast a warm circle across the steps she had climbed so confidently less than 30 minutes ago. This inquiry concerns potential enforcement of unrecorded covenants, improper lien threats, and representation of jurisdiction beyond recorded boundaries, Daniel continued. Each phrase landed cleanly, without accusation, without emotion. Just fact. Investigator Bennett turned her legal pad so Brenda could see the list of documented complaints. Names she recognized. Residents who had nodded politely at board meetings. Owners who had quietly paid fines rather than challenge her. Several parcel owners reported pressure to sign annexation consent forms under threat of escalating penalties, Bennett said. None of those forms were executed. Brenda shook her head slightly. We were streamlining compliance, she insisted, but the sharpness had drained from her tone. I could hear the faint ticking of the clock again, each second marking how quickly control can evaporate when it was never rooted in law to begin with. Daniel looked toward the open doorway, and then back at her. There is also the matter of tonight, he said. Entry onto private property without consent, absent exigent circumstance. He did not need to elaborate. The broken latch spoke for itself. The security footage timestamp continued to glow in the corner of the screen. I felt no rush of triumph, just a quiet steadiness. Months of certified letters, archived emails, and recorded meetings had led to this exact moment. Not confrontation, not shouting, documentation. Mrs. Whitmore, Daniel said gently, my office prefers voluntary cooperation before considering formal action. That begins with acknowledgement of jurisdictional limits. Brenda's shoulders lowered a fraction. The rigid posture she carried like armor softened into something more human. The scent of lake water drifted in again, cool and clean, cutting through the tension in the room. I may have interpreted the bylaws broadly, she admitted, the words measured. And cautious. Daniel gave a single nod. Broad interpretation does not expand statutory authority, he replied. The phrase was quiet, but final. Outside, a breeze moved across the surface of the water, rippling reflections into fractured lines of light. Inside, the balance of power had shifted without a single raised voice. And for the first time since she stepped across my threshold, Brenda Whitmore understood that belief, position, and title do not outweigh the weight of recorded law. The stillness after Daniel's last sentence felt different than the earlier silence. Before, it had been tension. Now it was consequence settling into place. Brenda's posture shifted again, not defensive this time, but calculating. She stepped away from the doorway and toward the table, as if proximity to the documents might somehow return control. The porch light outside hummed faintly, casting a steady glow across the gravel drive where her vehicle still idled. I could hear the low engine vibration through the open door, a reminder that she had expected this visit to be quick and decisive. Daniel did not move his chair. He simply watched her with the same calm expression he had carried all evening. "What happens next?" she asked carefully. "If we cooperate." The question was no longer framed as authority. It was framed as survival. Investigator Bennett closed her legal pad with a soft tap. "Voluntary corrective action," she replied. "Immediate suspension of enforcement against non-member parcels. Written notice to all affected property owners clarifying jurisdictional limits. Withdrawal of pending lien threats. Full submission of amended covenants for proper review." Brenda absorbed each condition in silence. I studied the faint reflection of the ceiling fan blades in the dark window behind her. Months ago, she had stood in front of a room of residents and declared that compliance was non-negotiable. Tonight, negotiation was the only option left. "And if we decline?" she asked, voice steady but thinner than before. Daniel folded his hands again. "Then this inquiry advances to formal review under state oversight statutes," he said evenly. "That process includes examination of association governance, financial practices, and enforcement authority." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The words financial practices lingered in the air like a distant warning siren. Brenda's eyes flickered, just for a moment. The lake breeze pushed the survey map slightly again, the corner lifting and settling like a quiet reminder of fixed boundaries. I thought back to the neighbors who had called me in whispers. The retired couple who paid $3,000 in fines rather than risk legal fees. The single father who removed a dock bench because she claimed it was visually disruptive. Patterns. Not accidents. Patterns. Brenda exhaled slowly. "We will cooperate," she said at last. The certainty was gone. What remained was practicality. Daniel gave a small nod, acknowledging the shift without celebrating it. "My office will expect written confirmation within 10 business days," he said. "Effective immediately, there will be no further enforcement actions beyond your recorded subdivision." The engine outside shut off abruptly. Brenda must have pressed the remote without realizing it. The sudden quiet felt heavier than the idling hum had. She glanced toward the door again, then back at Daniel, then finally at me. For a brief second, there was no authority in her expression, only recognition. The recognition that stepping across a threshold without consent carries consequences. I stood slowly, not in triumph, not in anger, but simply to close the distance between the table and the doorway. The wood beneath my boots answered with that familiar triple creak. The lake remained steady and indifferent beyond the porch. And inside my cabin, the line between belief and law had been drawn clearly enough that even Brenda Whitmore could see it. Brenda stood there for a few seconds after agreeing to cooperate, as if she was waiting for something else to happen, some final reversal that would restore the version of reality she preferred. Nothing dramatic came. Just the steady sound of the lake brushing against the dock and the low rustle of paper as Daniel gathered the documents back into his folder. The night air had cooled further, and the scent of cedar and water drifted through the open doorway, where the latch still hung slightly misaligned. I stepped past her onto the porch, the wood giving that familiar 3-note creak beneath my boots. From there I could see the outline of her vehicle in the gravel drive, headlights dark now, engine silent. The sky had fully shifted to black, scattered with faint stars reflecting across the lake's surface like distant porch lights. Behind me, Daniel's voice remained calm and procedural. He outlined the next steps again, slower this time, ensuring there was no confusion. Written notice to residents. Immediate suspension of enforcement beyond recorded boundaries. Submission of amended documents for lawful review. Brenda listened without interrupting. The tone had changed completely. No more declarations about protecting values. No more claims of emergency authority. Just a careful nod at the end of each sentence. When Daniel finally closed his folder, the soft click of the clasp felt definitive. Investigator Bennett slipped her pen into her jacket pocket and stood. There were no raised voices, no threats, no spectacle. Just the quiet mechanics of accountability setting into motion. Brenda turned toward the doorway, pausing briefly where the porch light cast a warm circle over the threshold she had crossed so confidently less than an hour earlier. She looked down at the damaged latch, then back at me. "I will have that repaired," she said, her voice measured and restrained. I met her gaze evenly. "Send a licensed contractor," I replied, "and include the invoice in writing." It was not hostility. It was procedure. She gave a small nod. The gravel crunched beneath her heels as she walked back to her vehicle. The sound carried across the water, then faded when the door closed and the engine turned over softly. I remained on the porch as the taillights disappeared down the narrow access road, red reflections briefly stretching across the trees before vanishing entirely. Inside, Daniel stepped beside me, hands in his coat pockets, eyes on the lake. "These situations escalate when no one checks them early," he said quietly. I nodded. The dock lights glowed softly at the shoreline, shielded and compliant, exactly as county ordinance required. For months those lights had been cited as symbols of defiance. Tonight they simply illuminated the water as they always had. Documentation had done what emotion never could. The porch light hummed overhead, steady and unremarkable. The lake remained unchanged. The boundaries were still where they had always been, drawn decades ago in ink and recorded in law. And as the night settled fully over Clearwater Lake, it was not volume or confrontation that restored order. It was patience, paper, and the quiet weight of statute. The next morning the lake looked exactly the same as it had the night before, which is how you know real justice has nothing to do with spectacle. The sun rose slow over Clearwater, turning the water from charcoal to silver, then from silver to that clean blue that makes you believe in fresh starts. I stood on the end of my dock with a mug of black coffee warming my hands, watching mist lift off the surface in thin ribbons. The dock lights that had once been labeled violations shut off automatically at 6 a.m., just as they were programmed to do. Timed, shielded, lawful. Inside the cabin, the broken latch had already been temporarily secured, and by mid-morning a licensed contractor would replace the hardware properly, documented, and receipted. Procedure. That was the difference now. No more declarations shouted across property lines. No more bold letters printed on association letterhead implying power that did not exist. 10 business days later, certified mail arrived not from me, but from Pine Hollow Homeowners Association. The envelope felt lighter than the ones I had received for months. Inside was a formal notice to all residents clarifying that shoreline parcels outside the recorded subdivision were not subject to association enforcement. Pending lien threats were withdrawn. Annexation forms were rescinded. Compliance reviews were suspended pending state review. It was not an apology. It was something better. It was acknowledgement. I heard from neighbors quietly after that. The retired couple whose dock bench had been cited. The single father who had paid fines without protest. Their voices sounded different over the phone. Not loud, just relieved. The state attorney general's office continued its review, methodical and measured. There were no headlines, no flashing lights, just requests for documents, clarification of bylaws, and reminders that authority begins and ends where it is lawfully recorded. Brenda Whitmore did not knock on my door again. When I saw her vehicle pass along the access road weeks later, it moved at a normal pace. No slow roll, no inspection glare, just a car traveling a public route. The lake remained steady through it all. Wind across water, oars dipping at dawn. The triple creak of my porch boards each time I stepped outside. The boundaries had never changed. They had simply been challenged by someone who believed confidence could substitute for consent. It cannot. Paper endures. Ink holds. Statute outlasts personality. I did not win by shouting. I did not win by escalating. I won by documenting, by requesting records, by inviting the right conversation into the right room at the right time. The cabin still smells like cedar and coffee in the morning. The Survey lines remain exactly where they were drawn in 1978. And when the porch light hums on at dusk, it does so under my authority alone. Justice is not loud. It does not kick down doors or flood rooms with noise. It sits at a wooden table, opens a folder, and waits patiently while belief collapses under the weight of recorded law.